Hello, everybody, and welcome to a Pilates Hour today. We are super excited with dear friend, mentor, colleague, leader in the field of fascia science and myofascial treatment. She is an amazing lecturer. She lectures frequently all around the world. Carol Davis, good to have you on the Pilates Hour again. We are really privileged today to have Dr. Davis with us. And Carol and I have met just this week, and I just was so excited with all of the new things that she always brings to the table. And I want you to understand something. Carol is always reading, studying, asking questions, looking at research. She's presenting, she's synthesizing the information from a lot of different fields, and she's just a plethora of information. But on top of all of that, Carol, it is your passion for this work that makes all of us so excited to hear you. So welcome, and it's so good to have you back on the Pilates Hour.
Thank you, Brent. So good to be here.
We were talking Tuesday about sort of, what do we want to talk about? What do we want to bring forward? And so Carol and I have a couple things, and we just felt like we could just talk for hours. Let's just start off. I mean, you've been doing a lot of presentations internationally in the fascial world. A lot of them have been virtual because of COVID and post-COVID times. But you went to London. Tell us a little bit about what was happening in London at that conference when you were there.
One of the joys of fascia, well, first of all, greetings to all of my friends from Polestar Pilates around the world. And one of the ways that I reunited with you was when Brent would have me speak at the Polestar conferences. And the other way was when my Polestar colleagues would join me in fascia continuing education courses. And one of the continuing education courses where I'd always meet up with Polestar folks and Pilates folks in general is John Sharkey's fascial anatomy dissection courses, where John takes cadavers and we work in tables like we did, those of us who were educated in the medical model and had cadaver dissection as anatomy. We worked with donated bodies. I was fortunate enough to do 2 dissections, 2 different years, actually 3 with John on teal fixed cadavers, where it's not a stiff cadaver that's been fixed. It's soft, it's been soaking in oil. And so we can see the tissues and feel the tissues in a very different way. And we try to do as much fascia sparing dissection as possible. In school, we got rid of the fascia because it was in the way. But now we recognize the importance of this tissue and the ubiquitousness of this tissue and how it interrelates with all of the other cells in the body. And so I was in London to help John Sharkey and his faculty and the students in a fascial dissection at King's College in London. It was a very interesting group of people. The people who were there included Neil Thies, who is a pathologist from NYU, Joanne Avison, a yoga teacher and a spiritual educator, John, myself. I think Jean-Claude was there as well. Jaap van der Wal from Holland, who speaks about fascia in the embryo. And all of us together, the faculty, are around cadavers, around people. Some of them have never done dissection before, but we look at this fascia tissue and talk about the interrelationships and the communication system of fascia and how we're recognizing how wrong we've been as we've described the inner workings of human beings. So that was just it's always a real pleasure. Now, John did a fascial dissection at Ohio State 2 weeks ago. His next one, I think, is in Italy. And then he's going to do one in New York City next year. John Sharkey, Sharky, he's from Dublin. He has a school in Dublin, and I teach with his faculty. I teach myofascial release with his faculty in Dublin.
Now, you mentioned that there was some things that were sort of these discoveries or some new discussion on what you found there that sort of challenged previous philosophies of how the body works or the dissections. What were some of those things that came out?
Well, I think that it's really, we're catching up with the concept of fascia as a communication system. We always knew fascia was part of ligaments and tendons. We knew that the fascia kind of wrapped around muscles, and nothing could be farther from the truth. Fascia is not like saran wrap. Fascia is living fluid tissue made up of collagen, different kinds of collagen, three main kinds of collagen, but also other different kinds, a triple helix, very plasticky kind of molecule, protein molecule, elastin, a very springy molecule, and this polysaccharide ground substance, this glue, this fluid liquid glue. Sometimes it's very, very, very stiff, like in the lumbosacral fascia. Sometimes it's very, very thin and filmy. Most of the time it's very, very thin and filmy. But the issue is every one of our 35 to 70, 75 trillion cells is not just surrounded by fascia, it's embedded within the fascia. It's embedded within the fascia so that, for example, muscles could not work except that the fascia within the muscle is directly linked to the fascia around the muscle, which is directly linked with the fascia in the area, so that when we say contract your muscle, muscle never shortens, muscle never contracts. What muscle does is tense. And in that tensing, it's an auxetic contraction. Like when we used to do biceps, look how strong I am, popping up. That's an isometric biceps auxetic contraction. Well, then what moves? We got actin and myosin, and yeah, they got there. They're doing that. But the fascia and the muscle together itself is tensing, and the ligaments and the tendons are responding to the external forces, usually gravity or motion, and they're doing, in closed bar chains, 4-bar chains, they're doing the motion. The muscle's just tensing, offering. So
we could say then basically that the motion is the elastic response with the tension response. Like you're saying, the motion, it's like the tension itself with motion and load.
That's right.
Will create the amount of displacement or elasticity of the ligaments and tendons.
Right.
And the tension inside the muscle fascial
it's the force
component is the force that would determine how elastic the deceleration or acceleration is based on the load or the movement or the direction. I love that.
Auxetic is AUXETIC. AUXETIC. It's a principle that is found. It's in soft tissue. Auxetic contraction.
Interesting. I obviously teach the physiology at the university, and so I got to teach the musculoskeletal physiology. And now I'm gonna, unfortunately, because their exams are based on science from 30 years ago.
You can't imagine how
it's so frustrating.
Horrible it is.
It's so frustrating that I have to teach
when we know that it's not true. We know they're teaching stuff that's not true.
Yeah, I have a funny story to tell you. I got in trouble at the university I was teaching at because I went in and they wanted me to teach core control, and I said, well, I'm going to teach the latest science on what this is, and we don't use that term anymore, and we don't talk about volitional contractions of transverse abdominis anymore. So I went through a whole training of it. Yeah. And then I got in trouble because they're like, well, that's not what the test questions are going to be about. And we got to prepare them for the test questions. I'm like, well, that's 15 years old. We've been talking about this for 15 years. So everybody, you are getting some firsthand information. And even when I teach the actin myosin, even in the literature, it says this is a theory. In the books
there for sure, but it's not shortening the muscle.
And so that's really interesting. I mean, we're going to talk more about this later, about sort of even challenging the traditional biomechanical model of movement, which I can't wait for them to hear from you. When we look at this idea of the tension creating the it's the contraction it is the contraction of that muscle, the isometric contraction, increasing the tension or decreasing the tension of the belly of the muscle, but its effect and the movement. And I've been thinking this forever because to me, everything has sort of a, we're accelerating and decelerating animals, right? I mean, when we move. And so, what we want to do is if structure is in the proper place with its elasticity, then things like walking really is an elastic venture of acceleration and deceleration based on a relationship to gravity.
That's right.
And this is where fascia gets even more exciting. There was a couple questions in there, but talking about how fascia is a major player in our proprioception and is the largest sensory organ with the Golgi organs, if I understand that correctly. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit more on how not only is it responsible for creating the tension and the elasticity in our bodies, but also responsible for a lot of our proprioception to interact with our other vestibular and visual centers of the brain and the nervous system.
Fascia as a sensory organ. I often get the question: is it just because the nerves are embedded in the fascia that we call it a sensory organ? No, it's true. All nerves are embedded in fascia. All the brain is surrounded by fascia. The glial cells, the dura,
epineurum,
spinal cord is surrounded by the dura, and the cable nerves coming out of the spinal cord in perineurium, and then then they're also embedded in the fascia. The fascia is the home of the autonomic nervous system, the peripheral nerves, especially the sympathetic and parasympathetic nerves that are oftentimes unmyelinated. Some are myelinated, but they form the sympathetic parasympathetic imbalance that we're in so often, that the sensory that goes up to the brain. But very interestingly, what we know now is just under the epidermis and under the skin are Schwann cells that with deep pressure and pinch send nervous system type stimuli down to the free nerve endings. We say they're free nerve endings, they're not. They're surrounded with Schwann cells. And the peripheral nerves, the free nerve ending, the interoceptive nervous system picks up this sensation, this touch, this deep touch and pinch, sends it to the dorsal column of the spinal cord up into the brain. Most of it is sent to the sensory motor cortex, but in the situation with the interoceptive nervous system, how do you feel? Somatic feelings: cold, angry, hot, tired, anxious. Somatic body sensation, and then the emotion that accompanies it. How do you feel about being cold? Oh, I'm so glad to be cold. I've been so hot for so long. Are you kidding? I can't stand being cold. The feeling that goes with the feeling. Now, here's the interesting piece. What we're coming to know through the interoceptive data: every single sensation that gets registered in our bodies is never clean in and of itself. It is always couched in memory and in association, and it never is pure. And with that memory and association comes with it a whole battery of sensory understanding, so that one person can just freak out with thunderstorms because of some sort of PTSD. We know that that's true. We know that that's how agoraphobia develops. People just get so scared, they just want to go in and they just want to stay safe. All of that is mitigated through the fascial system. Fascia is a river of communication. It's not just the cable nerves and the peripheral nerves, it's the chemical nervous system. The fluids that flow through, the hormones and the steroids, the cytokines, the little messenger molecules that go to with the immune system, that go to attack things, and wound closing, that all goes through the fascia. So fascia is in and of itself a nervous system that is larger in square feet than any other, and has more sensory and motor receptors than any organ in the body, including the retina of the eye, which used to be the one that we would claim was the most sensory rich.
Sensitive, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. That's great information. And I think that, understanding too, we've talked often about how even photons and light travel through the
Yes.
fascial system, the tubules.
Yes.
So we're looking
Thought.
at fluids,
Thought.
chemosensitives. I mean, we look at all
Right.
of those things. And, when I teach inflammation, right, about inflammation in the body,
Yeah.
is exactly what we're talking about, is that it is all messaging, right? It's all
Yes.
messaging.
And
So there is a
every disease
trauma.
starts as inflammation, right?
And there's a trauma, and it's going to do signaling. That signaling can be chemical, it could be magnetic, it could be electrical.
Yeah.
But it's going to signal. And how does that signal tell the capillaries to open up a
Yes.
little bit to let white blood cells come in? Or how does it, signal to say, hey, to the macrophage, time to come over and help the neutrophils out? So to me, it's just like, it makes so much sense, because so much of our
Has to go through the
movement,
fascia.
yeah, and it's, if you limit yourself to thinking of purely the somatic nervous system, or purely, reflexes, or those kind of, sort of antiquated philosophies on movement, it doesn't make sense of how the body can respond so instantly to threats or to challenges. And even more so, I think what you bring up is, we talk in chronic pain management, right? We look at the centralized pain. We look at things that are obviously, as you said, the collective memory, the things stored in the parietal lobes, things stored in the body, in the fascial tissue, and the triggers are going to cause some kind of response. Now, based on our history and our experience, and this is where we work in the Pilates, and I just wanted to tie this in real quick because it will make a lot of sense. We've been talking about creating positive movement experiences without pain, right? So rather than talking about, let's get these muscles strong, or let's get this range of motion bigger, when somebody is dealing with chronic pain and they have the perception that movement equals pain, right? That's that sort of construct you were talking about that exists for whatever reason, mainly because they've had pain every time they move. And we now create a positive movement experience without pain, right? The fascial tissues, all the body tissues are all of a sudden they're confused. They're like, well, wait a minute.
Yep.
I'm moving and I'm not having pain. And this is one of the great gifts that we have in Pilates, is to be able to create graded movement, load movement, that can create that positive experience without pain, or without increasing pain, that will shift the paradigm of, now I'm going to say, shift the paradigm of the fascial network, the fascial system. It's the whole body. It's shifting that paradigm of belief of movement equals pain to one of movement brings joy, or movement brings function.
And I feel that joy in my weekly Pilates sessions. I feel exhilarated when my legs work together on the springs and in the slings. I just, it's a wonderful experience. And then when I can translate that, getting up and walking.
Before we move on, there were a couple questions that, just to sort of close down the idea of talking about sort of the muscle fascial theory. And that was from Catherine. And Catherine asked, again, just for clarification on the sliding filament model, and maybe just make a quick comment on sort of closing that chapter before we move on to the next one, of what you're talking about with the auxetic model, contraction model versus the muscle filament. And my understanding is still the muscle filaments are doing their thing, but it's not necessarily creating the moment arm.
Right.
It's creating the tension that's going to create the moment arm.
It's the power behind the moment arm. It's the power behind the moment arm. Yeah. And auxeticity, it's not even easy to say. Auxeticity.
I'm going to have to practice it.
Yeah, auxeticity. But you're not going to find it in a lot of places. If you look up on the Biotensegrity website, you might find it. And we have a video that we're going to show you that will have it in it, that we're going to refer you to, that you can watch. It's very, very important that you understand that there are no levers, and there are no fulcrums like we learned. Everything is a closed bar chain of ligaments and tendons working around the joint, and the tension compression of biotensegrity keeps the joints apart. If the joints are locked together, they say the ligaments hold the joint steady. Well, the ligaments hold the joint open so that it can move.
There's always space in the x-ray.
Yeah, right.
You know, it's funny. And I was just going to say to Catherine, don't beat yourself up. I mean, I'm teaching at, a number of universities that are thought to be the most advanced, and they're all still teaching muscle filament theory. So you're not antiquated. What you're hearing now is really new science that's going to help us better understand, and also understand how to treat, and why movement is going to be so important of how we create load in these tissues of the body to, facilitate a healthier movement when there's been trauma or disease. There was another question that was from Lindsay French. And Lindsay said, can we keep fascia hydrated, more fluid through nutrition, movement? And the question is how? So before we jump into sort of that, because I do want to spend some time in the movement model, because that's what I think we're most excited about talking about today. And I also wanted to hit a couple other questions, or at least comment that we've answered some of those questions that came in to you and me, Carol. But any thought on Lindsay's question about hydration?
Oh, sure. There are two ways that water gets into the fascia. When you drink water, you drink H2O, and we think the spiraling on the inside of the gut tube spins that H2O, a very stable molecule, into H3O2, crystalline water, heavy water. And that H3O2 is very unstable, and it links to the collagen. It binds to the collagen. It's crystalline, so the electrons are flowing all over the place. They're not very stable. It's all part of the crystalline structure. But you can't get water fluid into the fascia by drinking it alone. You have to get it in through two particular ways, through compression and elongation. And that's the myofascial release and the working with the rollers and the balls, and this gentle pressure, not hard pressure, not the tools, not the fascia blaster. This very gentle going down to where the person pushes back, and then a little stretch, a little elongation. I'll talk why not stretch. And then you wait, and when you pick your hands up, it's osmotic pressure pulls the fluid from in that softer, the polysaccharide ground substance melts, it becomes thinner because of the electrons from our hands. And then it as we pick it up, the fluid flows into the fascia from the capillaries that are right in outside the embedded within the extracellular matrix that flows through the wall of the capillary. The other way is through movement. Through the jostling and through the rhythmic movement of Pilates, and through walking and exercising and running. The movement of the muscles jostles, vibrates the water out of the capillaries into the fascia. There's another way that's pathologic, and that way is leaky gut. And when the tight interspaces of the intestine opens up from leaky gut, from inflammatory process, food and fluid get out into the circulatory system and into the fascia as toxins. And then the immune system has to come and clean it up. It sees it as an antigen. And there are all kinds of waste products then that are left behind. And we think that this is the genesis of long COVID. The waste products that are left behind by the immune system trying to attack these viruses in the fascia of the lungs or the heart or the liver or wherever, and the brain. And we get the side effects of the thwarted immune process. And then that sludges up the fascia, and that crystalline river flow. Everything in the body is done by vibration. And vibration is best experienced as flow, the different flows, breath, hormone flow. We've talked about this, the steroids, the nerve system flow. The flows get stopped up because the fascia gets dehydrated with age. It gets dehydrated with toxins. It gets dehydrated with posture. It gets dehydrated with repetitive motion. Brent, that wonderful violinist from Austria that we worked with, and she had repetitive motion problems, and you worked with her on the oeuvre, and we got her moving again and using her body in a different way, and she got her playing the violin without pain. We can work with condensed soft tissue. When soft tissue should be supple, it should be open. And it's the polysaccharide ground substance gets dehydrated. And with aging, of course, we lose collagen and we become more dehydrated. So movement and myofascial release are really critical to, and yoga and Pilates and Traeger, which does a lot of rhythmic oscillation, right? All those kinds of holistic exercises, not weights, bungee cords, yes, kettle, yeah, because you're using your whole body, ropes, yes, but not standing in front of a
isotonic weightlifting. Yeah. There was a comment, Claudia Franceschini was talking about learning about the oxytonic system, and that when she was taught that, the comment she had made was looking again at sort of the relationship of like a TheraBand's load in how it has that more elasticity and how that was part of that
resistance,
whole body.
The resistance, right.
Yeah. Carol, before we jump into movement, I just wanted to make sure we touched on some of the questions that came our way. And I think we've touched on a number of them already. One was, can you overstretch fascia? That was an early one that we both looked at and sort of highlighted.
Yeah.
Quick comment on that?
Oh yeah, a big comment on that. Our old understanding was we were stretching when we were doing this, and sure enough, elastin does open up. But what's happening is we are within these boundaries. The outside of our skin is our boundary, and when we have fascial restrictions of any kind, what's happening is collagen and elastin is folding over on itself. And so it becomes restricted as it folds over on itself. And when we release it, what's happening is we're not stretching, we're elongating so that the origami can kind of go out to its outer limit. But we don't want it to go past the outer limit. And here's an auxetic contraction. This is a Hoberman sphere, and we use it often to teach breathing. When you breathe in, if you start, when any part of the breath will affect the whole body, but you breathe in to the limit of your boundary, and then you breathe out. And if you breathed in beyond the limit of your boundary, you'd be in trouble. And we don't usually have breathing or lung problems that way, but we do have muscle, soft tissue problems that we have sprained ankles, we have stretch marks. That is pathological, elongating the elastin and the collagen beyond its physiological limit. That's a stretch. And just like a shear, we don't want to use the word shear because shear means cut, like shears. What we mean is a diagonal, a diagonal kind of elongation. And then the other one is slide. There's no sliding underneath the skin. It's all glide because of this wonderful hyaluronic acid. And there is no, there are no empty spaces. There are no open spaces. They're all filled with this gluey stuff. And we have to have just the right amount of hyaluronic acid to have the good glide. If we have too much, it gets stiff. We lose compliance. If we don't have enough, it doesn't glide enough. So it's a balancing the hyaluronic acid. Somebody said, what about these products that they're selling now? Hyaluronic acid is difficult to get it to metabolize for the body to use it. You have to be really very careful. I think there are probably some out there that might be helpful, but I think for the most part, people don't know what they're buying when they buy hyaluronic acid or collagen for that matter, if they want to be healthy.
Yeah. And so again, in summary, that if you were using extreme force that you actually damage tissue would be too much.
And stretching is pathologic. Stretching in the new sense. In the old, we're never going to change it. There's a whole industry based around stretch therapy. They're not going to change it for sure. But the fact is that when you understand really how fascia works, you want to adopt a new language, because the old language puts us back to the scalpel in the 1500s. We are not parts. We are not made of parts. We're one whole, one dynamic whole. And when one thing moves, everything moves. Yeah.
You know what you just reminded me of? We were arguing in the clinic, a couple of us therapists, and ignorantly so, but we were working with somebody that had a shoulder pathology, and we just couldn't figure out where in the body the restriction was coming from. And you just came zipping by. You said, check the left ankle. And we're all like, oh, Carol, you are so crazy. And sure enough, it was dorsiflexion loss in the left ankle. And we just got the fibula moving. And her right shoulder started moving without pain. And we were all just sort of like flabbergasted, going like, what the heck? But since then, the idea, and again, this is very important for us as Pilates teachers, is that, you know, we are creating these incredible whole body movement experiences.
Yeah.
And it's in these whole body movement experiences. Even think of the mat work. Like we go from roll up, roll downs, rollovers, side bending, side lift, mermaid. And we're moving these tissues in all planes, hopefully within their limits. So we don't push beyond the limits, which is nice because Pilates is relatively safe compared to all the other, you know, exercise forms that are out there that we can load tissue. We should never be so overzealous that we would actually do harm. And this happens sometimes in yoga where they're trying to pull a pose with a very westernized body, trying to do a pose that their tissues have not adapted to. And their weakest link ends up moving too much to a point that they maybe are doing some tissue damage themselves. This is where we want to be careful, is that it's just having these successful movement experiences are going to bring about more benefits to our clients than any one perfect exercise or a perfect organization. You know, it's bringing the awareness and the connection between body and mind and spirit, the whole body thing. Beautiful work. Let's jump down a couple more here before we, and I'm seeing the questions are starting to fly in, which I knew they would. One was, is bone fascia? You've answered that already. So basically it's a crystallized.
Bone is crystallized fascia. It's soft tissue. It acts as a stabilizer. It acts as a compression element for most of the time for us, but it also acts as a tension element when when we are bouncing up and down. It takes the energy in and acts like a spring and gives us the spring to go back up again in our gait. And that's what the film will show you that I'm going to have Melissa post on the chat, that you can watch movement according to biotensegrity and fascial science.
Yeah, I can't wait to see it.
Yeah.
There's also a question on Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and that's a question I have as well.
Hypermobility, right?
You know, as far as people that have a true connective tissue disorder, does that have any? I mean, is there any discussion of?
Yes, of course. In fact, there are some of my colleagues have Ehlers-Danlos, and it always comes up in discussion around fascia. And you have to recognize that the joints have to stabilize as well as move. There has to be some stability around. And when you've got hypermobility, you are vulnerable to moving beyond your therapeutic range. But wherever you have, and Brent will teach you this with his spine course, whenever you have hypermobility, you've got hypomobility someplace. And very often what we have to do is find the imbalance. And when we talk about imbalance in fascial terms, we're talking about where is there too much compression and where is there too much tension, because they have to be in balance for alignment. Now, fascia will find its way home. Fascia is your friend. Fascia will always protect you, will always hold you in your auxetic openness. It will hold you open. It will hold you up. And then when you find yourself twisting and so forth, then you ask, why am I twisting? Or why is that joint hypermobile? Well, Ehlers-Danlos has a genetic component as well as a whole body kind of component. So what we're trying to do, I think scoliosis is a good example. I don't have a scoliotic curve here, but I can do it with my hand. Let's say this is a scoliotic curve, and here's the concavity, and here's the convexity. And in physical therapy, what we were always taught was to open up the concavity and strengthen the convexity to try to bring it back up. Well, open up the concavity, but open up the convexity too, because we got too much compression here and too much tension here. So if we have too much tension here, how are we going to balance that? We're going to compress so that we can start to get a kind of a elongation so that it comes into balance. If we have too much compression here, yes, we're going to add tension. So it's using your hands, using your eyes. Where is there too much compression? Where is there too much tension? You say, well, I'm not a manual therapist. I'm a movement therapist. Well, you can add springs and add stability and add structure or take it away according to what's needed. I always love to work with Polestar Pilates folks because I love to get rid of the fascial restrictions manually for you so that you don't have to fight against this dehydrated, constricted, congealed substance. Let's open that up, and then you guys move it to keep it open. And that was one of the questions. When you open it up and move it, will it just go back to where it was? Well, if your posture tells it to, yes. But if you keep moving and elongating and doing your yoga and doing your Pilates, it should open up and stay open for you, especially if you're getting enough water, and especially if you're breathing well, and especially if you're posture savvy, and especially if you practice thought hygiene. Now, thought hygiene is really important because as soon as you start seeing yourself as a loser, as soon as you start seeing yourself as old, as soon as you start seeing yourself as unable to ever heal again,
my muscles are tight.
Those thoughts are gonna move in there and take over the cells.
Yeah.
You've got to reframe your thoughts and stop the negative monkey mind.
We introduced that mind setting course for that very reason, is to stop, deprivating thoughts and negative thoughts. And, a lot of times when we're working, somebody will come up and say, "Oh, Brent, I'm a bad breather."
Yeah,
and I'm
right.
like, well, who told you you're a bad breather? You look very alive to me. Your skin is pink. You must be doing something right. But somebody along the way, probably some therapist, told them that they were a bad breather, or my whole body's tight. I'm a tight person.
Yeah.
And then, we put them on the Pilates and we have a couple successful experiences, and all of a sudden they have 30 more degrees of straight leg raise. Well, they didn't stretch their tissues 30 degrees.
No,
they just had a change in their organization strategy.
That's right. That's right.
And this is where we're looking and saying this idea of distribution of movement equals distribution of forces.
Yes.
And so when we're looking at anything that moves too much, instead of trying to stabilize just that one area or that one joint, it's like, maybe it is, as you mentioned, we increase mobility in other joints, and that takes the load off of the segment or the tissue or the bone or the muscle.
This is a wonderful book. Everything Moves. You can get it on Amazon. Everything, Susan Lowell. It tells you about biotensegrity. It tells you about fascia. And it's written from a holistic perspective, not just pure science. It's the kind of thing that Pilates therapists really love. It's basic biotensegrity, and it's basic the art of movement. And it's a wonderful book. It's a lovely book to read. I love it. I brought the two books that I love to read the most, this one, and then the other one is David Lesondak's Fascia, What It Is and Why It Matters. Those two books, David Lesondak and Susan Lowell de Solórzano, those two books should be in your fascia library. But we'll
add those to the post.
Right. The encyclopedia, new in its next edition
is by Dr. Schleip.
Yeah, Dr. Schleip and others. Fascia, the Tensional Network, and this is all the science, the basic science, up to date as of this year. So this is the book that you want to have in your library, the encyclopedia. You're curious about the polysaccharide ground substance, look it up in here. The science is all in here. And of course, James Oschman's book, Energy Medicine, is all about the vibration.
I want to spend a little bit of time talking a little bit more about the biotensegrity model.
Okay.
And talking a little bit about this idea of tension and compression in their opposition of forces, how that leads then into what we're talking about, sort of the new philosophies of movement science, the new philosophies of, sort of shifting from everything being about biomechanics and orthokinematics to something being about how they're actually responding as a tension compression relationship through space. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Well, when we are conceived, there is a moment when the sperm hits the egg, hits the embryo, and there is biotensegral energy from the Akashic field in the sperm, biotensegral energy in the embryo of the egg from the mother. And when the sperm hits the egg, there is conception, and the unicellular embryo turns into a zygote, which starts then developing. And as it develops, it follows a blueprint. We only ever paid attention to the DNA blueprint. That was everything. But then somebody asked, well, wait a minute, what's driving that motion? And it's the biotensegrity tension and compression product, the sum of tension and compression. Reading that DNA, the cells multiply, they don't divide, they multiply, and then they start going in on themselves. The embryo develops, and the first to develop is really the heart. The heart develops first, and it's up here, and it drops down, and it pushes the spine up, and the brain comes up here. The heart comes down here, the little limb buds for the arms come out here, the legs come down here, and the whole embryo is fueled by this tension and compression that creates this beautiful baby in the womb. And then we're born and we come into gravity, and then that internal biotensegrity force has to respond to the external gravity and all the other forces we load on it as we're lifting and so forth. And the cells develop. We know that good bones are developed by osteoblast, osteoclast balance. We know that cells are constantly created and destroyed every day. Every 7 years, we have a whole new person here, including a new skeletal system. There's not one cell in my body except the lens in my eye, because I haven't had cataract surgery. And that's the only one that doesn't renew itself. The lens of the eye, same cells I was born with 77 years ago. I hope I'm going to die with them, but maybe not. I'll have cataract surgery if I have to.
If it helps you see better.
Even our brains are new. And so we don't really, and remember when we talked about vibration and precipitation and electron flow, the photons in the body are the energy for the electrons to do the work. And Steve Levin says, we are not things, we are process. Human beings are in process from the moment of conception until the moment we take our last breath. And that internal energy is, following the tensegrity model, is biotensegrity, same true for trees, same true for all animals. And that external force that causes the heart to be placed right where it is in the middle of the chest, not upright on its side. All of that is forming us. And then we live our whole life in this vibrational flux as process. And genes are deciding which proteins are needed when. The flow of the electrons through the cell membrane out into the extracellular matrix is all a part of a dynamic process, and it never stops. We are never in stasis. We call homeostasis because that's what we call balance, but it's really homeodynamics, everything, and it's hierarchical. At one point, we might get too much, need more calcium in the system, so all of a sudden the circulatory system and the autonomic nervous system opens up and gets calcium out of and that's the hierarchy. That's what's taking charge. But for the most part, there is no hierarchy. The energy of the heart drives everything, but it doesn't mean that it's always in charge. Sometimes the gut's in charge. There's more nervous tissue in the neuroendocrine system in the gut than there is in the brain. And we never knew that. The gut is just as important. The heart brain, 400,000 neurons in the heart, the gut brain, hundreds of thousands of neurological tissue, and the brain all working together in this communication system, mitigated by the flow of the fascial network from the moment that we're conceived until the moment we take our last breath.
And I would love to go into the gut, but we're not going to have time for that. But I was just thinking of also the coexistence of other animals and creatures that are so necessary in our healthy gut to be able to create and maintain the healthy nervous system in the gut, the brain, the heart, et cetera.
10 times as many cells there as there are cells in our body.
Now, Carol, you know that we're in a group of people here who the majority of us are very much interested in body, mind, and spirit, the higher sources, what's his name? He says, all of us should be sorcerers trying to connect with source to be able to understand things. Anyway, that you said something very early on with the
Akashic field.
The Akashic field. And so maybe just take a second. You're completely safe and welcome here to talk about the Akashic field and God and light and energy and universe as you see fit. So feel comfortable to share that with us.
Well, I came to understand early on that this force that is in me, and Andrew Taylor Still, the father of osteopathy, said, fascia is where the soul dwells. There is an essence inside of us that is numinous and metaphysical, and it has very much to do with that part of ourselves that we'll never know completely. But in science, Lynn McTaggart has a wonderful book called The Field, where she outlines the science that looks at what is this field out there outside the bioenergy of our bodies beyond us, and what fuels that. And we don't know. We do know that all of space is in a field, and the field connects all of us today. We're seeing each other on video, and we're hearing each other. Those are manifesting within the field. But there's something else. There's an energetic link of all of us who are thinking about and focusing on a kind of stream of thought that is in the field. And that Akashic field, to me, when I did my research on empathy and the crossing over and getting yourself back at oneness, how we're all connected. And then I started realizing therapeutic presence and started working on the mastery of my myofascial release and watching Brent and Shelley and Christy and the Polestar people and Elizabeth Jimenez working. I said, there's something more here. There's something more here within. And that more for me was compassion and love. And so for me, that field energy, when I drop out of my left brain into my body and listen with my hands doing myofascial release, I feel filled up with something that's so positive, that's so filled with a sacredness. And to me, that is Akashic field energy. That is the 0 point field. And that is biotensegral flow. And to me, it comes from the concept that God is everywhere, because the field is everywhere. It's what we're paying attention to, that we notice it or not. Yeah. And whether we're using it with attention and intention to help, attention to what we should be attending to, and some very nice science about this now, attention and intention to help, and the impact on the interoceptive nervous system, the feeling tone of the patient calming down, vagal nerve comes up, parasympathetic comes up, sympathetic overload goes down, and the person sits up and says, oh, I feel so spacious.
So light.
Thank you for helping me feel more at one with myself. That's connecting with that biotensegral energy that's fueled by compassion, as far as I'm.
You have a very special connection in your life. And I also come from a family of twins. My father's an identical twin. My brothers are identical twin. Dr. Davis is an identical twin. And I think so much of really understanding that connectedness, like I know you've been on opposite ends of the world and you've had the promptings, the sensations with your sister, Sue,
Right.
of just this incredible connectedness.
Connected.
And it's something that I've always been very fascinated with. Like even in my prayers, I'm praying that I can be aware of people that are in need. And so, just in the day, all of a sudden it's like, oh, you know what? I need to send a
Somebody
text
comes to
message to
mind.
somebody, or I got to call somebody. And, it's that
I
connectedness.
get those once in a while.
I'm sure you do. I know you do. And
From you.
the thing, yes, you get those calls, and usually there's something like, "Well, I'm so glad you called because I was just thinking about something. I
That's
was just
right.
having a rough day or something." But I
Yeah.
think what's important is that, when we approach whatever we do, whether it's teaching Pilates or myofascial work, or if we're a doctor or a nurse, or even if we are, in the sanitation department, it doesn't matter what our job is. If our intention, and we sort of have this prayer in our heart or our thought, connecting to Akashic field, connecting to universe, connecting to humanity, and really believing that, and one of the things that I always try to do is I try to look at something and I say, how does God see this child?
Yeah.
Because my judgment is very skewed and is horrible. But when I think, how does God see this person? And immediately, the word you used, compassion comes in. And realizing this person is somebody's child.
Yes.
This is somebody loves this person. Somebody is missing this person.
Yes.
And at that point in time, it is like that Akashic field opens up and the inspiration comes in. And I think a lot of times people are like, how did you know to do that? And it's like, well, I didn't. I want them to understand I didn't know how to do that.
Yeah.
What I knew how to do was to connect to the source. And I have a whole bunch of skill sets. I'm always working on my skill sets, right? I'm always working on the tools.
The mastery, yeah.
Yes. But how to use those tools is not a set formula as far as, oh, I see this, I do this. No. And it's hard to explain sometimes. Many years ago, you remember Dov Cohen?
Yeah, of course.
School?
He was my student. Yeah.
I know. That's what I'm saying. Remember Dov? And Dov was the first year that I was at University of Miami. Dov was getting ready to graduate, I think. And we became very close, and he became a senior educator for Polestar, lives in Australia, continues to
right.
But we were at a conference probably in 2006 or whatever, and Dov came up to me and he said, Brent, you have to quit separating your scientific mind from your spiritual mind and just be yourself. And it was a very insightful, observation of his. And I believe that. And to me, the fascial science, I really do believe the soul exists inside the fascia. I believe that light that we talk about, some people call it the light of Christ or the spirit or, the Akashic.
Buddha or prana.
It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter.
The breath, Buddha.
But it's like, that inspiration and that connectivity that we have. And so whenever I think of fascia, I think of connectivity. I think of, this energy vibration that you taught me that is just, it defines what I feel spiritually in a physiological way. Yeah. And to me, it's like somebody says, well, how can you be, religious or spiritual when you're a scientist? And it's like, how can you not? How can you not? Right. So why would
you ever use something like a fascia blaster on the tissue where your soul dwells?
I'll just get a 2x4 and whack you upside the head.
Why would you ever do that? I mean, if people just understood that this is the essence of what it means to be conscious, to be a human being, to have meaning in your life. This is the tissue that communicates that.
Yeah. Well, there are some great comments coming through, and I've enjoyed reading a lot of, Samia's comments and Susie's comments. Sarah Edwards always has good comments. And I think that we see this, information body growing and being more acceptable, even in such a controversial time and so much diversity, when we can be the source of unity, we can be the source of connecting, and we can be the source of being kind and compassionate. Right. And the challenge is, seek to understand the people that we're around. Seek first to understand before seeking to be understood. There's so many good pearls. What are the attributes, that are manifested in our touch? What are the attributes manifested in our intention when we're teaching an exercise?
And just like the soft tissue of the fascia, Our best response, as in Tai Chi and in martial arts, our best response to a force is the soft answer, the soft reply. Oh, I just can't. Da, 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 da. Really? I didn't know you felt that. Tell me more about what you're talking about. I want to understand the soft response rather than going back, rather than getting that Graston tool out and making that thing red.
Yeah.
No, soft
Receive.
response. Receive and just listen. Soft response. It doesn't mean you have to agree with them.
Yep.
It just means that you'll be open and listen. And very often that's all they ask for.
You know, something else you taught me that I use all the time, and that is that our clients and our patients have the answers to their needs. They just don't know how to explain it all the time. But if we listen and we put ourselves on a parallel with them instead of authoritative or condescending, and we listen to them, there is so much information that comes that can enlighten us as to the millions of potential causes of the same symptomology in that person's body.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, Carol, we're out of time, and we're just going to do it again. We're just going to do it again. You're so popular in the Polestar world, and we love you.
Well, I love
you.
I love Polestar Pilates people.
And you are always welcome. And now that things are settling down a little bit, we'd love to have you at the farm and Polestar Life Center, and have an event that people could come, and we could also have some treatments. Yes, we have the treatment rooms, and Elizabeth is here, and Shelly's here. We could have a little powwow. So if you guys are interested in that out there in Polestar Pilates Hour land, let us know. We'll be maybe putting something together for spring or summer. And sending you a lot of love. Thank you so much, Carol. Is there any last thing you'd want to share with somebody? Anything that you want to do a shout out for, or before we close? Any last thoughts?
This is family for me. When Brent found me in 1997.
Well, yeah, before that, it's actually 95. Yeah, we found
95. When Brent
I moved in 97.
In 1995, I had no idea of the path that we were going to walk together. And it has been so rich in every possible way. I just really love watching this whole movement develop. I'm so in awe of the Polestar curriculum and the instructors. And I have benefited physically and emotionally and spiritually just from being associated with you. So thank you. Anytime we can get together, it's always a joy for me. And I love you, Brent. And I love the whole process that you're going through to help the world be a better place.
Thank you. And you are a big part of the world being a better place. Everybody, we love you. We'll send out all of the links and the book references that Dr. Davis shared with us today. Above all things, be kind and show compassion and make the world a better place. And this year, our motto is Movens Mundi. We're moving the world, and we do it through love, through compassion, kindness, and movement. So
and remember the soft answer.
The soft answer.
Remember the soft answer.
And we'll see you next week, and then we'll get ready for some holiday times, and hopefully you'll spend some time with some loved ones and friends over the holidays. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Carol. Be kind.